Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the second webinar in our Physician Leadership for Clinical Integration webinar series. If you missed our first webinar on physician alignment strategy, you can visit our website at www.ihstrategies.com and view it from our Knowledge Center. The topic of today's presentation is Physician Leadership Academies, Essentials to Develop Needed Competencies. My name is Vicki Radcliffe, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. Before we get started with our presentation, I'd like to review just a few basic reminders and instructions. First, if you are having any issues getting online to this presentation, you can try calling our Integrated Healthcare Strategies front desk, and they'll try to assist you. That number is 612-339-0919. Again, 612-339-0919. They might be able to help you if you're having any issues. Please be aware that I have muted all the participant lines for our entire presentation so that we can reduce noise and make sure to diminish any distractions. At the end of the presentation, we will allow time for questions and answers. So if you have a question you would like addressed, simply type it in and we'll read it off and answer it for you. To do so, you'll click on the Q&A button on the top menu bar of the screen, type in and submit your question, and again, receive it, read it off, and Mr. Jim Rice will answer it for you. As I just noted, our presenter today is Jim Rice. He is an Executive Vice President with the Executive Compensation and Governance Practice here at Integrated Healthcare Strategies. Now I'll go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Rice and let him get us started. Jim?
Thank you, Vicki. Hello, everyone. Thank you for investing approximately 45 minutes with us to explore the challenging arena of physician leadership development. Today we're going to be focusing in on two related topics, the competencies that we're seeing across the nation being developed intentionally within these physician leaders, and then a series of ideas that we find important to address a weakness that has become evident as health systems are investing in developing their physician leaders, both their informal and formal physician leaders. They often overlook the type of infrastructure and context into which these physician leaders are expected to thrive and to perform well. So we will be sharing some additional comments about some of those aspects of factors to increase the likelihood that physicians, once they are developing their competencies, have a good chance of applying them wisely, and that the organization's overall performance has a higher probability of being enhanced with those focused competencies. We're going to be dealing with physician leadership in general. Obviously, the key reason driving you being interested in this topic is that all of us are worried about how to secure greater physician engagement, physician alignment in our journeys toward integrated delivery systems and accountable care. And the likelihood goes up dramatically if we have effective physician leaders at all levels of the organization in both formal and informal roles, whether they are leading task forces, committees, or assuming key leadership roles over service lines or vice presidents of medical affairs. We need a new generation of physician leaders, and it's incumbent on all of us to look at what we can do to enhance their versatility, to strengthen not just their competencies, but the style with which they deploy those competencies in their various leadership roles. On slide 3, we are sharing a very common exhibit that we've all seen. This is the progression of physician engagement and alignment from very low integration in some of the traditional medical staff models to fully integrated models where organizations may not only have employed physicians, but physicians in active leadership roles and some of their own integrated models where they have their own health plan, or certainly the rush to accountable care organizations is along this continuum. And one of the messages, of course, that we want to reinforce as this webinar begins is that the likelihood that you make this journey toward closer and more effective integration goes up if you have effective leaders that are physicians. It's important, of course, to acknowledge it's not easy. I highlight a headline from a recent Harvard Business Review article which indicates that physicians working in teams doesn't necessarily come easily because of their prior acculturation and training. We often think of them, and they think of themselves, as heroic lone healers, and this often gets translated into a leadership style that is sometimes not as productive as it needs to be as they reach out to physician colleagues and nurse colleagues and managers to mobilize them into effective teams and groups. Another inherent obstacle to looking at effective physician leaders and their deployment of competencies is shown on slide 5. This is an actual org chart. Every one of the boxes on this chart is a physician leader. This is a hospital that has teaching programs. You don't need to read this as much as get the emphasis on the array and the complexity of physician leader roles. The far left of this slide, where we see pink boxes, are classic teaching programs where physicians are involved in residency program leadership positions. The yellow are committee assignments chaired by physicians in the traditional medical staff. All of the white boxes in the middle are sections of the medical staff. This particular hospital client had approximately 600 physicians organized into 5 divisions. Each of the divisions has clinical section leaders, all of which have physicians with some compensation for being a leader. These are all the traditional medical staff leader roles. As we move into the accountable care era, we move to the right into the the green boxes, in which we have, for this particular client, over 50 part-time and full-time medical directorships. This is where hospitals need to be very cautious, not only developing the right kinds of competencies for this proliferation of leader roles, but to make sure that you are disciplined in how you invite them into those roles, because if you don't have the positions described carefully and you're tracking their time and effort, you are subject to some risky vulnerability if you are audited, and these physicians, when they aggregate up income for leader roles and their clinical income, if it is beyond reasonable market rates, you will have some challenges that you face. So the competency development that we're going to explore over the next few minutes is no longer a nice to have, it is essential, and if we don't find ways to do it wisely, we're going to run into some troubles. One last stage-setting comment is this quote from 1873. I always find it useful to ground myself that as we get enthusiastic about looking at physician competencies and how best to develop them in Physician Leadership Academy and other kinds of training mechanisms, we need to recognize that some of these same challenges were with us a long time ago. These leadership characteristics with physicians, at least 6 of them here are important to keep in mind. Respect for other physicians and patients, non-judgmental listening skills, willingness to subordinate one's interest to the service of others, personal accountability, immersion in and knowledge of day-to-day workings of the organization, and, of course, support and encouragement of physician colleagues. I wish we had more of us that have been involved in leadership roles, and, in fact, more hospital and systems today that would be mindful of these lessons and insights from 1873. I'd like us to walk the talk by finding some bold new approaches to make those a reality. I'm looking now at slide 7, where we're going to start moving into a discussion of competencies and some of the leadership training and development tools and methods we're finding across the nation to be helpful to develop those competencies. The competencies that we will be examining help physicians be more effective in these 12 roles that we see. everything from designing new care models for chronic disease, which we know requires interdisciplinary teams, and so we put an even higher spotlight on those competencies for physician leaders that look at their capacity to build trust and engagement from eclectic teams and interdisciplinary teams for that disease management challenges, all the way to playing roles in establishing contracts, improving staff morale, expanding health promotion, improving patient compliance. These are some of the challenging tasks and areas in which physician leaders are going to be expected to provide some effective movement in our journey toward integrated models. The other thing that we have to be mindful of is that we have to be prepared to leave by the wayside some of the old model of finding leadership just within the medical staff. This webinar will help you think of competencies you're looking for on classic medical staff officer roles, but that's not the main purpose of this webinar. In the past, we would look at electing physician leaders to the medical staff. Most of the organizations that we see signed up for this webinar still have that predominant embrace of elected leaders. It's unlikely that that will change soon, although we are aware of organizations that are having a blended model where some of the division leaders are elected, but some of the section leaders might be appointed so that you can guard against that old tongue-in-cheek adage that when the physician was out of the room, they were elected to be a leader. That's not the kind of rigor, obviously, that we need going forward in our physician leadership. So let's start looking at what it takes for leadership development in the new environment. We have a lot of work has been done by many of the health professions. They collaborated, as some of the folks on this webinar are very well aware, in something called the Healthcare Leadership Alliance. The website is cited for you on slide 9. They were, I believe, very enthusiastic, perhaps a bit over-enthusiastic, because they identified 300 competencies clustered into 5 areas. It's useful for physician leaders to be aware of that, but you're going to burn them out if they feel they have to master all of those. But it is a very helpful and useful reference point for you as you start developing your own model of physician competencies and your enhanced or refined approach to leadership development for these physicians. What we're finding across the nation, though, is new models are necessary that are driven by the vision of the healthcare organization, the business strategies and values you're trying to have woven into the organization, and the kinds of leadership imperatives, therefore, that will help you implement your strategic plans over the next decade are going to suggest the kinds of competencies you need in your administrative leaders as well as your physician leaders. And this capacity building model is very important to get it right, but also to be creative and to not assume that the competency profile you put in place will always be there. As your organization evolves, as your strategy evolves, the competency profile of your physician leaders will need to evolve as well. We have pulled together research over the last 3 years in a number of fronts that relate to physician leadership effectiveness and competency development. We're going to now hit a few of the highlights for you, but you can refer to our Knowledge Center in our website to receive a number of documents that are complementary, that are a part of our passion as a firm to encourage our clients and the industry to be a little more formal, a little more focused, a little more effective in identifying and developing those physician leaders. You'll find documents there that identify factors that frustrate and facilitate physician leadership effectiveness. We'll hit a few of those highlights with you now. We also have identified in work that I've been involved with for the last 15 years in Europe where we established a international center for health leadership development. 70% of the participants in that over the years have been physicians, which, as the British like to joke, suggest have gone over to the dark side. And we want to share some of the competencies learned there in that large organized National Health Service system in England. On slide 12, we have a result of work there on developing physician leadership into a competency model that is organized into these 5 areas: demonstrating personal qualities, and a few sub-points that you'll see, working with others, managing services, improving services, and setting strategic direction. These have been found after several years of study in the organized system of England to be essential competencies. You can easily Google Physician Leadership Competencies, National Health Service, and download a free manual on how they have defined those competencies. You can adapt those to our unique realities here in the United States. We will share what we've concluded to be some of those important dimensions. We've all seen the exhibit on slide 13. We're not going to spend time on this, but as we start defining competencies, it's useful to be reminded and for us to remember that physicians' acculturation process, as they have competed to get into medical school, to get the right kinds of clerkships, to find promising residencies, they have developed individual-oriented expert mindsets. And when we look at how executives have been acculturated, the approach and the style is different. And the great physician leaders are those that are able to be boundary spanners, applying competencies from what they have learned in saving lives and making differential diagnoses into problem solvers and group management experts as well. When we looked at the areas of concentration for physician leaders, if they start deploying their competencies, we studied what are some of the measures that will be built into their position descriptions and to their incentive compensation. And our study identified 5 key elements of what is judged by chief executives and other healthcare leaders to be important areas of accomplishment for these physician leaders. Not surprisingly, improving quality metrics, clinical care guidelines, and you'll see the rest of these on slide 14. These are elements that start to shape the competency. Excuse me. The change of season is upon me with the head cold. Thank you for putting up with me on that. On slide 15, we have identified some leadership style attributes. We've been working with a research group in Colorado called TRACOM on what are important dimensions of interpersonal interactions that physician leaders are going to have as an important element of their competency map or their competency profile. And we found that the style dimensions are important because they're wrestling with some very challenging issues. And the 5 top areas that are getting and bedeviling physician leaders are, first of all, dealing with physician apathy toward the hospital and medical staff activities, dealing with disruptive physicians, recruitment and retention of physicians, changing physician attitudes toward collaboration across specialties, and general mistrust. Now, you lay into this and over this the new challenges of getting interdisciplinary teams for chronic disease management in an accountable care area to work, and you'll see some real challenges. So you'll see also that as we get ready to look at a few sample competency profiles for you, it's useful to be reminded of the message I mentioned as I opened the webinar. We're going to look at competencies, But if you don't pay attention to the systems and the infrastructure and support necessary for these physician leaders, it's a hollow promise. They may have competencies that they're not able to effectively or in a sustained way apply. And that's because of some of the reasons that we see on slide 16, resistance from other physicians, no clear performance goals or measures. They feel a lack of time to focus their leadership activities, weak project management skills, and poor group or interpersonal management skills. So what we have guided our research over the last several months is when this study shows that these are things that are going to get in the way of physician leaders to be effective, we need to look at competencies and physician leadership development that directly try to remove or reduce these kinds of frustrations. One of the tools that we are seeing used increasingly, and I see from some of the people on this webinar that several of you I know are using the compact tool, the gives and gets. It's a useful framework to have intelligent conversations with your physician colleagues about what are they going to need to be an effective physician, and what does the organization have to do to meet those needs, and vice versa, what is, in an accountable way, physicians are going to have to be prepared to deliver. We're illustrating that with the Virginia Mason Compact here for general physicians. We would encourage you to use the same disciplined process of conversation and interaction and planning with your physician leaders so that they are engaged from the beginning of what they are hoping to get out of their physician leadership role and what, therefore, you want from them and what they want from you. If you don't do those kinds of disciplined conversations, again, we are finding the development of physician competencies and competency maps and competency profiles are a hollow promise. It's very important that those are developed and implemented in this context of robust support for physician leader effectiveness. On slide 18, you see a classic list of competencies and topics in which we see physician leadership academies developing physician leadership knowledge and skills and attitudes. They go from the disciplined areas of law and economics. It's very often when you're talking with physicians going into leadership, they really want to feel much more comfortable and confident and competent about money flows and some of the hard dimensions of management and leadership are on this top list, which generally speaking, when you interview physician leaders, 90% will want to master those more. Only about 10% will be mature enough to say we also want to enhance our listening, our communicating, and our problem-solving skills. This is unfortunately where we see many of the physician leadership development programs weak. If they do not focus on these bottom three areas, which might be characterized as the softer clusters of competencies, you're going to be suboptimizing your leadership development and their ultimate effectiveness. So please balance the, quote, hard dimensions and topics of leadership development with these softer elements of interpersonal development and style dimensions. On slide 19 is a common model of competencies for physician leaders. This has recently been used by one of our clients. It's organized into the four areas of personal attributes, people leadership, business acumen, strategic leadership. And you can see on the sub-points in each of those four arenas some of the competencies that physician leaders need to master. Everything from the upper left-hand corner, where you have conversations and discussions and case studies about how to inspire trust, develop adaptability, to the lower right-hand corner, where you deal with some of the classic business and financial acumen, which there are sub-points under all of these, of course, ranging from reading financial statements so that they sing to the physician, much like a blood gas report from the laboratory or some of the other body fluids and the biochemical analyses that have happened that they get so used to. We need to support them to think of the metaphors and the analogous use of information for diagnosis and problem solving in the more management and leadership realms. Another element driving forward on this concept of balancing hard and soft dimensions are illustrated by the bicycle on page 20. The front wheel, in this metaphor of using your self-awareness and skills training to look at how as a leader you must be coaching others and managing conflict, which is a big part of many of the portfolios that physician leaders have to wrestle with. You need in your own design of competency developments and in your physician leadership academies not to be preoccupied with the back wheel and the technical competencies. They're important, obviously. They're necessary, but not sufficient for the effective physician leaders that we see necessary in this coming decade of accountable care. So please, again, in your design work and in your conversations with physicians, develop a balanced approach to both the back wheel technical dimensions with front wheel interpersonal activities as well. We've teased you with a series of competencies. More detailed profiles of those competencies are available for you from downloading reports in our website. I'm going to spend just a moment to call your attention to some of the methods of developing these competencies that we think are important as well. We are going to give you a chance to ask questions as we go through the last few minutes of the webinar, so I want to alert you to that effect, to be typing in questions if you have them or comments, because we're all in a learning mode here as we look at a new generation of physician leaders. Most of the large members of the American Group Medical Association, the Mayo Clinic, Virginia Mason, Cleveland Clinic, and others, have for years been developing their own physician leadership academies. They continuously refine the profile of knowledge and skills and attitudes that are necessary. They've also learned that just as it's important to stay fresh on the competencies, it's essential to be creative and flexible and fresh on the methods of mastering those competencies. In that regard, therefore, we've shown you a list of some of the many methods that physician leadership academies are employing to develop these competencies. These are shown on slide 21. At the top of the list is something that we find to be an essential ingredient to good, sustainable, and successful physician leadership academies, and that's the concept of mentors. We're currently working with a client where they have identified some internal and external mentors. These are often senior leaders across the organization that can actually enjoy talking with physicians. They respect physicians as true partners and collaborators and sometimes customers. And this positive two-way flow of exchange of ideas and insights and Q&A between mentor and mentee is a very important tool for physicians. In fact, when we've interviewed several dozen physician leaders that have gone through training programs for leadership, one of the most effective ways for them to master this management and leadership portfolio of materials is similar to the way they mastered medicine, which is through that strong, assertive, but caring chief resident who really challenged them and stretched them, but was a resource for them to learn. The physician leadership academies take different styles. The vast majority extend over a multi-month period of time. They build in anywhere from 1 to 3 competency areas into each of the Academy sessions. These often are on Saturdays. Occasionally, physicians will elect to do them in late afternoon into evening. Usually, these sessions are from 3 to 4 hours in length. It's best if you can mix up the setting from round tables, not in a rigid classroom, because one of the things we've learned over the last 15 years, both in Europe and here in the U.S., is that when you ask physicians how they want to learn their leadership competencies, it's not in a classroom. They want to learn it like medicine, standing up at the proverbial bedside with practical case studies that they can dig into a topic, look at some application in a real-world setting, and then have a period of time for reflection. Usually this is 2 to 3 weeks between sessions and topics. So case studies and interaction and engagement are essential for mastering the competencies. The faculty for these academies usually are a mix of internal and external, some national speakers, some local business school faculty, but increasingly, if you want to sustain this, you rely on internal executives and even board members that can offer some unique insights about the skills and knowledge and attitudes that these physician leaders are going to need for their future success. We're also starting to see now that there are many more leadership academies for physicians across the nation. Just as we see accountable care learning collaboratives, we are actively helping support developing physician leadership academies where some of our clients get together and exchange what's working and what is frustrating them with curriculum design, whether they have to pay physicians to participate, most don't, by the way, as well as how much reading material is effective versus the fire hose for these physician leaders. Mini MBAs, webinars, digital portals are all tools that are supportive of the learning process for these physician leaders. So when we are looking at mentoring as an important element, I've shared with you some quotes from Marshall Goldsmith. He joined us in our Cambridge University leadership program to talk about the importance of the soft side of leadership development. Mentoring and interpersonal effectiveness are going hand in hand for that to happen. As you see in the last quote on slide 22, all other things being equal, your people skills or lack of them become more pronounced the higher up you go in an organization. We are finding that to be very true of physician leaders because they are senior in the healthcare systems, and that leadership is not only visible but can have a big influence on the overall effectiveness of the organization. We have just a few more minutes left. I want to highlight a few more comments as it relates to some of the knowledge and skills and attitudes, and then we're going to have an opportunity for some questions and answers and comments from our audience as well. I mentioned to you the organization we've been working with on versatility of physician leaders, and their research has found in a number of industries across all types of leaders and all types of industries that these five observations on slide 23 are worthwhile keeping in mind as you refine your approach to physician leadership development. This concept of social style, this interpersonal interaction between managers and leaders, can't by itself predict high performance, but when you look at this in the light of versatility and the appropriateness of situation-based leadership style application, it really starts to leverage the effectiveness of these physician leaders. And we would encourage you then to look at some of the publications that you can secure free from their website and be open-minded as you are developing your competency profiles for your physician leadership. We will now look again at the competencies in 3 dimensions, the knowledge and the skills and the attitude necessary. On slide 24, we have identified in the knowledge area they have to have an above average mastery of medical care, and most of the best physician leaders also have great clinical skills. Those are necessary but not sufficient to being an effective physician leader. Many physician leaders try to continue to have their time focused in on patient care activities. Some, however, find that they quickly move from 10 or 20% administrative or leadership activities into 40% and then 60%. And once they are consuming 60 to 80% of their time in leadership roles, very difficult unless they have unusual self-control and discipline to stay in contact for that couple hours a week with patient care, to both embrace a career and a profession that they love, that they're passionate about, but also to show to their physician colleagues that they still can do diagnostic and interventions that help patients thrive and survive. But these other knowledge areas that you see on visioning and the patient satisfaction dimensions of patient-centered care, these are knowledge arenas that you need to build into your physician leadership development. You'll see on slide 25 certain skills that we've found to be important, and certainly attitudes that are essential. And the whole concept of transformational leaders and situational leaders are important, because physicians that become part-time physician leaders may largely do that in the context of groups, task forces, committees. They may find that that's an exciting way to leverage their time and talent and move into program managers, service line executives, where they are partnered with an administrative counterpart, and then moving into a variety of other executive roles. So it's useful also to think of a physician executive's comment about this for the last few slides that we'll be sharing with you. Dr. Peter Person from Essentia Health in Duluth, Minnesota, said it's not enough to get them developed or selected. We've got to be prepared to invest in their continuous development, but also their effectiveness, which is where I'm going to close this webinar with 10 observations about the context and infrastructure that you'll need to be mindful of to not only develop, but to unleash the effectiveness of these physician leaders. This infrastructure begins with some of the studies that we found a couple of years ago with clear job descriptions. It's surprising to me still to go across the United States and find a growing number of physician leaders that do not have a job description. Nobody has given them a proper orientation to their roles and responsibilities and the expectations of performance. And this is a recipe for disaster, as some of you on this webinar have already found out. We've learned and have continued interaction with these 10 programs of promise that you see on slide 28. These are all organizations that have been investing and been successful in developing physician competencies through intentional and formal physician leadership academies. We have information about their programs on our website that you can download. From the interactions with those three, there are three key lessons we'd like you to keep in mind as we start looking at infrastructure support. The one is, of course, that success is going to be absolutely dependent on how effective you are at developing effective physician leaders. These physician leaders are going to have to balance their mastery of clinical and leadership competencies. We've given you a few of those, and you can download more of those from our website, but also the concept of how they learn these competencies needs to be kept in mind. So with that impression that we hope we've made on the importance of being intentional about developing competencies, being creative about the types of methods that you build into your physician leadership academies, we want to leave you with these 10 key points. These points on slide 30. You must begin at leadership positions being carefully defined and go all the way down to periodic refinements of the systems and the infrastructure in which physician leaders are expected to work. We'll go through some brief comments on all of these 10 points, and then we will hold the webinar open for some conversations and questions. On 31, we see leadership positions defined. That shouldn't be of surprise to you. I'd like to move quickly to some of the key dimensions that you see on position descriptions on slide 32. We have developed a library of over 80 of these position descriptions. Those are important for you to be as disciplined with those as you have been with your other managers. You also have to look at how you recruit for physician leaders. Not every physician, no matter how smart or how clinically adept, can be an effective leader. And so it's important that you're as intentional finding those both informal and formal physician leaders by going through a disciplined recruitment process that starts with the competency map of a position description and the expected dimensions of performance. And then, as if you were doing an internal search firm, you go through that discipline to find them. You also have to have conversations with your physician colleagues involving your human resource executives, other members of the executive team, on what are the precise performance metrics that you want. You bake those not only into the position descriptions and your recruitment activities, but also into your incentive compensation arrangements. You should be conducting annual performance reviews of your physician leaders just like you do middle managers and senior managers, and those should be driven toward measurable expectations of performance. Use a more formal orientation approach. Make sure that these physician leaders aren't thrown naked into a briar patch and expected to thrive or survive. Make sure you walk them through expectations and the environment in which they're to be applying their physician leader competencies. Give them a good chance of hitting the ground running, just as you would for a new employee or another member of the management team. We've already talked about some of the developmental activities. They need to make sure that they have the tools as well as the knowledge. Certainly a key one that we've tried to emphasize in this webinar is mentoring. The seventh area is support. Many times physician leaders are expected without much orientation to jump in, and they have very little administrative support, clerical support. Some don't have some of the digital and electronic tools to manage 24/7 communications that are necessary for some of these leadership roles that they've been thrown into. So please be a little more intentional about the support and the partnership spirit that you build if you want those physician leaders to be effective. Performance reviews are absolutely essential. Many times physician leaders have never participated in a 360 review where their immediate supervisor, their direct reports, some of their colleagues provide an opportunity on how effective they are at discharging and deploying their duties as a physician leader. This can be a very healthy growth opportunity for them. Some aren't used to it, and therefore they may be a little bit resistant or defensive, but if they see that everyone is doing this, they will quickly see the value of it, just as they saw that kind of input on their clinical skills during an aggressive residency training rotation that they may have gone through. The last two items that we think are very important, so often we think that physicians are so smart, they've got senior roles, they're self-assured, they're accomplishing a great deal, that they don't need to be thanked for their work. Nothing could be further from the truth. Just as we see other types of leaders, senior leaders, middle managers, they need recognition, thanks, appreciation for the seemingly thankless jobs they take on. Physician leaders need this as well, especially if they tend to be some of the younger physicians, 35 to 45. They need to make sure that when they're embarking on this new journey that they're doing the right things and they're getting help and support to celebrate that as they go forward. The last one is to assume that things will evolve and change just as you build in continuous administrative process improvement and just as you embrace continuous clinical process improvement. Please take that same attitude to your physician leadership competency, skill development. As they develop their knowledge and skills and attitudes, continuously ask and invite their input to shape the learning methods, to shape which kinds of competencies and topics deserve a brighter spotlight this quarter than next. And just as you try to encourage and support continuous medical education, CME, you also need that for continuous leadership development as well. So these are the 10 areas that we think are important to keep in mind as you develop a new approach to competency development for your physician leaders. We've tried to suggest that the competency profile and the competency map that you need for your physician leaders must be driven by the strategic challenges in your marketplace, the strategic imperatives in your business plans, and please interview and engage physicians with you to develop those social compacts as well, mutual expectations that start philosophically what the institution needs from its physician leaders and what the physician leaders therefore in a quid pro quo way need back from the organization. Then you can start drilling into being precise about knowledge and skills and attitudes, competencies, in other words, that you want for the effective journey into more integrated models. We need to take just a few minutes for questions and answers. We thank you very much for taking time to be curious about what is being learned on physician leadership development, the kinds of competencies that are going to be important. We'll see if you have any questions, and then we will move to adjourn the webinar. Thank you for being with us. Vicki, do we have questions that have come in?
We do. Thank you, Jim. As Jim just noted, I'm going to go ahead and move into our Q&A section right now. If you haven't yet submitted a question but you'd like to, it is not too late. You can go ahead and just click on the Q&A button at the top of your menu bar. A box will open up. You type in your question, click the submit button, and it'll get routed to us so we can read it off and answer it for you. Really quickly before I proceed, I want to draw your attention to the screen right now. The slide we currently have up has some contact information for Dr. Rice. If you'd like to contact him, have a discussion, you can reach him via his phone number or email address that you see on that screen. That said, I will go ahead and take the first question that was submitted by one of our participants, and that is, they ask, it seems that for us to meet our need for effective physician leaders, we need to pay attention to both their competencies and the methods of their learning these competencies. What's more important, defining the competencies or doing a good job of educating them of the competencies?
It's a challenging question. It does require a balance. I think it's more a question of timing. You first have conversations with your senior executives and your physician colleagues to make sure the top 15 or 20 competencies that you're going to intentionally develop in your training program are real and important. But then you've got to immediately discuss what are the methods that are going to work for your particular cadre of physician leaders. Most will have mentoring. Most will require and want case studies. They certainly won't want you to force them to sit in a classroom and use a fire hose at them and expect them to master it or to feel excited about using it. So it's a tough question. I would encourage you to pay attention to both, but sequence them. First on competencies, second on the methods. So I hope that's useful for that questioner, Vicki.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Next question I will take, this participant asks, you suggest a model that has technical topics of management and softer aspects of managing groups and interpersonal relationships. which ones are more important for our physician leaders?
I perhaps didn't make that clear enough in the webinar, because what we've found over the last few years looking at developing and supporting physician leadership academies here in the U.S., and we've seen it in Europe, we are finding it's the softer side. It's the interpersonal, it's the style, it's the manner in which they think about situations and issues and interdisciplinary teams working on challenging tasks, much more important than the hard side of reading financial statements, doing flow charts, even doing root cause analysis kinds of aspects of problem solving. So the soft side, the interpersonal side, I think, are the very important ones. Both are needed, but if you had to shine a brighter spotlight, Vicki, I'd emphasize those softer dimensions.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jim. This is a good question that I think many might be would benefit from. I'm going to go ahead and take this one next. So what is the difference in leadership skills for medical staff leaders compared to other types of medical director or service line physician leaders?
Well, one of the things I think they're looking at those that assume more classic medical staff roles and part-time roles. I know this is disclosing a weakness of my career development, but when I used to have a real job involved in some hospital management activities here in Minneapolis-St. Paul, we would, years ago, give out these medical directorships and medical staff leadership roles almost as a bribe. They would get a little bit of compensation. We didn't expect them to do much other than to dampen down any concerns and frustrations bubbling that in the medical staff. So those kinds of skills were, I think, ludicrous in the past. Most of the people on this webinar, I'm sure, are more sophisticated than I was back in the day. And so these medical staff structures and medical staff leaders are much more about the process of privileging and credentialing and running effective meetings. Those are useful, but not anywhere near the breadth and depth of leadership competency we need in the new medical directors that are managing service lines and managing whole parts of the clinical enterprise. They're going to have a robust set of skills from business aspects to the interpersonal and group and project management types of skills. They are different intensity and different breadth than we see in the classic medical staff area. So the future leaders are going to be those that move beyond the classic medical staff roles and become full-fledged partners in the success of the healthcare enterprise.
Good insights, Jim. Thank you. We have just under 10 minutes left here in our allotted time. I'm going to go ahead and take at least one more, and then we'll see how we do on time and if we have time for any more. I like this one, Jim. They ask, how important is it for the physician leader to be a mentor as well as be mentored? Should we have only physician mentors for physicians, or can other leaders be mentors also?
It's essential that physician leaders, after they have developed some of their skills, they be prepared and, in fact, be encouraged and supported to mentor others. Sometimes that will need some additional training and coaching to be a good mentor. Not everybody can be a good mentor. So that would be one response to that. And we're finding that it is not essential for physicians to mentor physicians. If they are good at mentoring and happen to be a physician, so much the better. But many physicians, as they are moving into their leadership roles, would love to have a productive relationship with the chief financial officer or the chief legal officer or the chief executive officer. They can learn from all of those executives, and it also has the added advantage, of course, of building a sense of collegiality and partnership across all aspects of the leadership team. So mentoring is important. Physicians can be mentors, but it is not essential that physicians be mentored only by physicians.
Okay, good point. I'll go ahead and do just one more, and I think that's all we're going to have time for, and then we'll wrap up. Our final question that I'll take is, what have you found to be the best ways to develop physician leader competencies after they have been in a leadership academy?
That's a wise question because it reinforces the conclusion that you're never done learning your physician leadership effectiveness and competencies. Just as we try to encourage physicians to continuously strengthen and enhance their clinical competencies to be an effective physician, to be an effective physician leader, they also need to not fall asleep at the switch or become complacent that they've got their mini MBA or an MBA or even has gone through some physician leadership academies. They must continuously have a hunger for eclectic reading, to interact with other physician leaders, other managers, other board members, always keep their eyes open for new insights about style that will help them in different situations, as well as knowledge nuggets that they can find by interacting through conferences and project work throughout the healthcare system. So it's useful to keep that open mind for lifelong learning, Vicki. I think probably we should wrap up the webinar now. I'll just close by thanking the people again for being interested in being more attentional about developing their physician leadership effectiveness and the academies that can be helpful to do that. Thank you for your time, those of you that have participated as listeners on the webinar. We appreciate what you're doing and look forward to opportunities for our paths to cross in the future.
Well said. Thank you, Jim, and thanks for so thoroughly answering all those questions. As Jim said, thank you for joining us. If you take a look at your screens right now, you'll see an upcoming webinar, the third in our series here on governing the physician enterprise. Go to our website at ihstrategies.com to our events page if you would like to register and join us for that next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.